Hello and welcome back to Shakesyear. We are working on Much Ado About Nothing. It is day 2 of Much Ado About Nothing, and we are in Act 2 already because there aren't that many monologues in this. So real quick, we're going to catch up on some stuff that happened in Act 1. Don John and Don Pedro were having a bit of a battle. Don Pedro won. Don John is grumpy about that. Everybody's hanging out at Leonato's place, Leonato being the governor of Messina. Leonato has a daughter named Hero, who Claudio has fallen in love with. Leonato also has a niece named Beatrice, who's been in sort of an ongoing battle of wits with a man named Benedicke, who was fighting on Don Pedro's side in the wars, as was Claudio. So they just spar whenever they can verbally spar, and that's all sorts of fun, but neither of them wants to get married or believes in love or any of that kind of stuff. So where we left off yesterday, Don Pedro became aware of the fact that Claudio is in love with Hero, and he's like, well, there's going to be a party tonight and everybody's going to be masked, so I will woo her pretending that I'm you, and then I can go and talk to her father Leonato and confirm the match, and in this way I will have won Hero for you, Claudio. And everybody's like, great, cool, let's move on our own ways. So then, as I mentioned before, there are no like scene breaks, there's only act breaks in this, but in other versions they have broken stuff up into scenes. So that was the end of Act 1, Scene 1, as a lot of versions call it. Act 1, Scene 2, we start the game of telephone where things come out wrong, where we have Antonio, who is Leonato's brother, thinking that instead of Claudio being in love with Hero, it's Don Pedro who's in love with Hero. So Antonio tells Leonato that Don Pedro is going to woo Hero, so Leonato goes to tell Hero that if Don Pedro proposes, she should say yes. Act 1, Scene 3, we're with Don John, who's like being all grumpy, and his quote-unquote henchmen, whatever, come in. There's Baraccio, there's somebody else. They also get this whole thing mixed up, and they think that Don Pedro is planning to marry Hero tonight, and they're like, oh, we can get in the middle of this, and we can mess with everybody and wreak some havoc, because what else are we going to do? Like, we lost our chance to rebel in this little skirmish thing, so let's just stir up some other trouble. So that's basically the end of Act 1. Act 2 starts out with people getting ready for this masked ball, and they're kind of hanging out, and there's some more conversation, and we get to hear yet again from Beatrice that she doesn't want to have a husband, and she likes making fun of Benedicke. And then a bunch of other people come in, so everybody puts on their masks, and there's little bits of flirting. Don Pedro takes Hero to go off for a walk. She thinks that he's actually going to propose to her when really he's doing it on behalf of Claudio. We get Antonio and Ursula having a little bit of a conversation, Ursula being one of Hero's cousins or something along those lines. We also get Margaret and Baraccio doing a little bit of sort of weird flirting, and then we get a bit where Beatrice and Benedicke are talking to each other, and she is totally aware of the fact that she's talking to him, but they're in masks, so she doesn't want him to know that she knows that she's talking about him, and she just rips on him. She calls him like the king's jester and all this sort of stuff, and he gets really miffed about it, blah blah blah. He goes, or there's a little discussion between him and Claudio, but then Don John comes over to Claudio and is like, hey, you're Benedicke, right? And Claudio's like, yeah, I'm Benedicke, like, what do you have to say? And Don John is like, Don Pedro is proposing to Hero for himself. He's in love with her and he's trying to win her over himself. And then he goes away, twirling his mustache, sort of a thing. And Claudio gets really bummed about this and gives up on Hero. He's like, never mind, I'm not going to marry her. I'm done with her. Like, boom, done. Just done. And then Benedicke comes back in. Claudio ends up sort of moving out of it. Don Pedro comes in. And Don Pedro knows that he's talking to Benedicke and wants to give him a little bit of a, like, everybody just kind of wants to get on everybody else's nerves just a little bit in the fun, playful sort of a way. And he's like, Lady Beatrice is looking for Benedicke because apparently he was really mean to her when they danced earlier. And Benedicke is like, oh, she misused me past the endurance of a block. An oak, but with one green leaf on it, would have answered her. My very visor began to assume life and scold with her. She told me, not thinking I had been myself, that I was the prince's jester, and that I was duller than a great thaw, huddling jest upon jest with such impossible convenience upon me that I stood like a man at a mark with a whole army shooting at me. She speaks poniards, and every word stabs. If her breath were as terrible as terminations, there were no living near her. She would infect to the North Star. I would not marry her, though she were endowed with all that Adam had left him before he transgressed. She would have made Hercules have turned spit, yea, and have cleft his club to make the fire too. Come, talk not of her. You shall find her the infernal Ate in good apparel. I would to God some scholar would conjure her, for certainly, while she is here, a man may live as quiet in hell as in a sanctuary. And people sin upon purpose because they would go thither. So indeed, all disquiet, horror, and perturbation follows her. So he's miffed, is what this boils down to. He's offended by the things that she had said about him a little bit earlier. So this is him just recounting some of those things and then railing on her and saying that she's like the worst person that has ever existed. And Don Pedro's like still kind of chuckling about it. And then Claudio comes back in and Don Pedro's like, hey, everything was great. I was able to woo Hero for you so you can get married. How soon do you want to get married? And Claudio's like, oh, it all worked out? Okay, let's get married tomorrow. And they're like, no, that's too soon. Get married like on Monday. So like a couple of days from now you can get married. And they're like, okay, cool. And then everybody except for Don Pedro and Claudio and one other person who I'm going to forget who it is, but there's like maybe four of them left on stage at the very end. And they're like, okay, so since it's going to be like 4 days before we have a wedding, let's pass the time by trying to make Beatrice and Benedicke fall in love. Won't that be fun? And they're all like, yeah, that'll totally be fun. And that brings us to the end of what many versions consider Act 2, Scene 1. And I think tomorrow we're in Act 3. So there's going to be another one, long one tomorrow. I hope you're keeping up with this. If you're not keeping up, if you're getting lost because I'm just saying stuff at you instead of getting to follow all of the paths with all of these people and who they are and how they intersect, I totally get that, and I apologize. Please just leave questions in the comment section, and we'll talk through it, and we'll make sense out of it, and all of that sort of fun thing. I feel a little bit bad that there aren't as many monologues in this one, because it's such a fun play, and it has so much like nuance and fun flirting and great insults and all that sort of thing, and we're just sort of plowing through it. But anyway, we will continue to plow through it tomorrow, and I will see you then.